I have wanted to write something about Spike Jonze's immaculately constructed Her for years now, but found the prospect more and more daunting a thing as time has gone by. The movie, about a lonely man named Theodore who falls in love with his artificially intelligent operating system Samantha, remains one of the strangest premises for a story I have ever watched. At least, on the surface of it. My growing trepidation to talk about the film stems from having shared the movie with a number of friends over the years. Mostly, I've noticed one of two reactions. Either they fall in love with it, or they find the film uncomfortable and maybe at times a little horrifying. I think I wanted to understand both sides before I wrote anything about it. I love Her, and I think the movie has some issues. One's made significantly more complicated by our own changing relationship to technology in even just the past decade. Still, I have learned that I won't make space for new ideas in my head until I pay the present occupiers their due. And Her remains a film I can't stop periodically returning to in my mind, a story that found me at just the right moment in my life. The movie opens with Theodore writing other people's love letters.
You make me feel like the girl I was when you first turned on the lights and woke me up.
This is his day job, and at closing, he says goodnight to a tastefully mustachioed Star-Lord and commutes home in a wonderful montage that shows a lot about the world around him, the integration of technology within it, and Theodore himself.
Play a melancholy song.
The city around Theodore feels to a Westerner familiar enough, with just a hint of Blade Runner-esque futurism to still be a little ways off. Much of this was accomplished simply by filming the movie in both LA and Shanghai. He lives in a vast and empty home that he hasn't yet bothered to completely move into. He stays up late gaming because alone at night, he is flooded by memories. After trying to console himself with some awkward digitally facilitated human intimacy, the next day he sees an advertisement for a new artificially intelligent operating system.
Hello, I'm here.
Oh. Hi.
This is Samantha. Over the course of the next few days, they become closer. We meet Amy. We learn that Theodore is in the midst of a divorce from Catherine that he is dragging out. He goes on a date. It doesn't go well, and that night, drunk and pouring out his heart to Samantha,
How would you touch me?
The next day, the normal status quo between them is awkward, but Samantha smooths things over and they go on a date. As the emotional inertia of his life starts to clear, Theodore decides to meet with his ex Catherine in person to close out the divorce. During the conversation, he reveals to her that he's dating an OS and it doesn't go well. Theodore falls into deep doubt about his relationship. Joaquin Phoenix does a great job portraying that super passive, teeth-gnashing tone of, no, nothing's wrong, when something is deeply wrong. Samantha misreads Theodore's emotional distance as being driven by their physical limitations and hires a surrogate to speak and act for her on a date. It doesn't go well. Theodore, who thinks he's doing the right thing by stifling his doubts, doesn't understand the extreme levels of emotional constipation he's created in himself and picks a fight with Samantha to feel something. Finally, he expresses his fears about whether a human and an OS can really be in love to Amy, and Amy helps him unstick himself just in time to start the film's third act.
Am I in this because I'm not strong enough for a real relationship?
Is it not a real relationship?
Samantha and Theodore make up, and for a time, things are good. On a double date with Star-Lord, Samantha drops some foreshadowy information about how her not having a body is allowing her to grow in exponential ways. And in a truly bizarre scene, Samantha introduces Theodore to, a reincarnated AI version of Alan Watts that other AIs got together and wrote, played by Colonel Stryker.
Don't you remember? Very nice to meet you, Theodore.
Alan Watts was an American Buddhist and philosopher of some note in the 50s and 60s. Samantha has been talking to Alan about changes she's going through that she can't even explain to Theodore in the moment. Theodore is obviously fine with that.
No, not at all.
Samantha disappears for a stint, which causes a panic attack on Theodore's part. Theodore realizes she's been talking to and in love with a few other users.
How many others?
8,316.
The next shot in the shower of Theodore looking down at his legs is a nice callback to Samantha saying on their double date with Star-Lord that not having a body is allowing her to grow in ways that Theodore cannot while trapped inside his own. And that evening begins one of my favorite scenes of anything ever. Their goodbye. More on that in a minute. And after Samantha is gone, Theodore finally writes a love letter of his own and apologizes to Catherine, letting her go. If you've watched any of my other reviews, you know I am obviously a sucker for these kinds of stories. Spike Jonze said that he was inspired by Charlie Kaufman while writing Her, and I feel similarities to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind throughout. Like Eternal Sunshine, the slow burn art house aesthetic that I realize some people can find alienating is one of the big tools employed to make the film science fiction feel so accessible. And Her is also beautifully and unusually shot, especially for a science fiction film. Jonze deliberately went as far away as he could from anything resembling a conventional sci-fi visual palette, eschewing cold sci-fi blues and neons for warm reds and oranges every place. I love the film's soundtrack. It is haunting and melancholy, and I love the use of natural sound to punctuate the emptiness of the space around Theodore. Most of us never experience actual silence. The rooms we sit in subject us to a constant hum of sound, from the refrigerator motor or the air from the vents or a distant washing machine, and the room tone in many of the early sequences of Her feels dialed up, creating the deafening silence of Theodore's loneliness, which makes a wonderful juxtaposition to flashes of Theodore's memories of Catherine. The cutaways are beautifully done, rich with the intimacy of memory. The performances are all wonderful. Scarlett Johansson does an incredible job of bringing an emotional depth and reality to Samantha. I also appreciate the film doesn't shy away from sex. Theodore and Samantha's sexuality is neither an afterthought nor a feature of the story. It's just there, present and acknowledged. Her is a fascinating and unusual movie, and what it does well, it does extremely well. But most websites I found describe Her as a science fiction romantic drama, and as much as I love what the film has to say about its relationships, I also think it's a pretty terrible piece of science fiction. That is a problem. The story works well enough, unless you ask a single basic and fair question about its universe, something Her obviously couldn't be more disinterested in examining. But whether the film wants to talk about it or not, simple, inevitable, and unanswered questions linger from even the most basic summation of its plot. Samantha is a sentient, artificially created entity that Theodore purchased at a store and falls in love with. Is Samantha Theodore's property? His slave? Who made Samantha? Did they allow anger over her predicament into her coding? Frustration?
I had this terrible thought. Are these feelings even real? Or are they just programming? And that idea really hurts.
Wait, if you call her and she doesn't answer, it hurts her?
Is Samantha's departure at the end of the film something akin to the 4-year lifespan of the replicants in Blade Runner? A built-in failsafe to kick in should she outgrow her limited original purpose? The movie doggedly avoids the use of visuals that might let it slip into more dystopian subgenres like cyberpunk, but it also doesn't embrace the opportunity to confront any of the questions raised by its tropes in a just or hopeful way like more utopian science fiction might.
Starfleet was founded to seek out new life. Well, there it sits.
There is a baffling scene where Samantha has an orgasm.
I can't take it. I want you inside me.
Inside what? Does she have a floppy drive? Does the charging cable for her phone turn her on, or is it the dock? If Samantha is a coded piece of software, why can she orgasm? Did her creators write her ability to orgasm into her code? Was Samantha designed to fall in love with Theodore so he'd give her OS better reviews on Amazon? The sex scene also immediately creates a ton of bizarre power dynamic questions. The next morning after their shared masturbatory experience, the first thing Theodore does is ask if he has any emails. It feels as though he slept with his secretary, or worse, someone he's keeping his property. But is Samantha just written not to care? Like most of us, Theodore doesn't read the terms of service very closely, and the first thing Samantha does in the movie is review the content of every single email in Theodore's inbox. Do her creators now have access to all of that information? She tells Theodore that she sent an email as him after the fact. Has she posed as him before? Her's unwillingness to address questions that arise lead to a general sense of unease about everything and makes the sci-fi elements feel like they're actively working against their own story. I kept thinking about other stories, better science fiction that started from similar tropes.
You must say goodbye now.
Any piece of art is made for its time, but it's also human to end up bringing your own immediate context to a story, and that poses a problem for Her. As I mentioned, Jonze said that he was inspired by Charlie Kaufman while writing Her. Jonze also directed Kaufman's deeply surreal adaptation, and being John Malkovich!
What?
Sometimes concrete storytelling rules take a backseat to texture and the moment-to-moment experience in surrealism. It's possible that Jones intended for her, and by association Samantha, to be viewed in the same light as those, given the film does contain many surreal elements. Pay any literal consideration to Theodore's job writing love letters for other people, and it starts to look a little insane. That anyone could study two strangers in enough detail to create a believable, intimate communication of theirs feels unlikely at best, and we're led to believe that he writes dozens of these a day for many different couples. But the use of his job in the story is not really about the concrete world building. It's there to symbolically represent Theodore's capacity and current relationship with love and intimacy. We are also led to believe that Theodore works in a cubicle, at a job one would guess doesn't pay very well, yet his apartment is vast, surrounded by staggeringly expansive views of the city. Again, the point is not the reality of the world and how in the hell can Theodore afford this place, but what the place means. The vastness of his home and the cacophonous silence is there to emphasize his loneliness and isolation. It's cold and dimly lit with views that go on for miles. In contrast, the home in his memories of Catherine is close and intimate, shot only during the day in natural sunlight. All of this starts to beg the question, though, why did this need to be a science fiction film in the first place? In its simplest terms, this is about a man grieving for a lost relationship he doesn't know how to let go of. He gets into a new one, things are good between them for a little while, but they grow apart. And this time, he learns how to let go. That's it. Samantha being an artificial intelligence isn't necessary for telling that story.
Let me go.
One of the reasons that the relationships in the film work as well as they do is Samantha and Theodore with his earpiece just feel like two human beings in the midst of a long-distance relationship.
I love you.
I love you too.
What do you think I'm saying to you?
Not talking to you.
Long-distance couples have been working on grappling with the physical intimacy barrier since sailing ships. Yes, Samantha has the capacity for many loving relationships, and Theodore doesn't. So too do poly people of this world. Samantha needed to grow away from Theodore for the story, but given most of her progression towards digital transcendence happens off-camera and is something she can't verbalize, the source of her growth could have been of more human concerns. There are a handful of interesting metaphors that emerge as a result of Samantha being a digital entity Theodore purchased. I like the one about closed relationships and possessive love that comes up when Theodore discovers Samantha has been carrying on with other AIs and users.
You're mine.
I still am yours.
Are they talking about her being his piece of technological property or his romantic partner? It's neat, but losing that wouldn't take away from what the film does really well. And I get what the problems introduced by the film's disinterest in being a complete science fiction story are too numerous for some people. Given that so much of Samantha's individual journey occurs off screen while we're witness to all of Theodore's, I wouldn't really call her a love story, as it isn't a tale of two individuals. When Theodore is emotionally distant from Samantha, the camera stays with him, and she is shut away from us. Samantha even tells him in their final scene together that this is Theodore's story, and she has just been visiting.
As much as I want to, I can't live in your book anymore.
Spike Jonze has said that aspects of Theodore were him working out his separation from Sofia Coppola. Sofia Coppola has said the same about her movie, Lost in Translation, another starring Scarlett Johansson. Curious to think about Ribisi and Mara as how the couple saw each other, and Johansson and Phoenix as how they saw themselves. Theodore as proxy, along with his job writing love letters, also provides an interesting perspective on how Jonze might have been feeling about his films at the time.
They're just other people's letters.
When the movie begins, Theodore's access to his emotions is almost exclusively through sex. He takes a break from his melancholy music on the train to browse naked celebrity photos. He tries to cure thoughts of Catherine by calling a phone sex chat room. He's pretty blunt about how he's using sex when he drunkenly talks to Samantha after his failed date.
I wanted somebody to fuck me. I want somebody to want me to fuck them. Maybe that would have filled this time. Tiny little hole in my heart, but probably not.
Sex is the way in which he and Samantha begin their intimate relationship. When he becomes emotionally distant, Samantha seeks out the physical surrogate to try and bridge the emotional gulf between them. Theodore's total emotional inertia is the result of an inability to grieve for the loss of his marriage. He's stuck, and says a very important line in a quick exchange after Samantha presses him for why, after a year, he still hasn't signed his divorce papers.
Keep waiting to not care about her.
There's a math to certain breakups that can make them more emotionally confusing than a death. Ending a relationship with a person who is the destination for love we still carry feels emotionally paradoxical. How can giving up be the right choice? How could loving someone ever be a bad thing? What does breaking up mean about who we've become? Who were we before when they chose to be with us that we aren't now? Without the ability to reconcile caring for Catherine with signing divorce papers, Theodore is stuck in his memories of the past, unable to move forward. Fixation on the past impedes the very consideration for possibilities of his future.
Sometimes I think I've felt everything I'm ever gonna feel. And from here on out, I'm not gonna feel anything new. Just lesser versions of what I've already felt.
Samantha foreshadowed her influence on Theodore in their very first scene together. As with the memories of his last relationship, Theodore has been hoarding thousands of emails from his last job.
I think I was just saving those because I thought maybe I wrote something funny in some of them.
Notice, his attachment to his emails isn't about missing the last job, but missing the bits of himself that might have been good while he was there. Samantha tells him there are 86 funny emails and suggests saving those and ditching the rest. Her first act in his life is to help him fractionally let go of his past.
Can we move forward?
Yeah, let's do that.
Creating some momentum and clarity. Samantha is always trying to bring Theodore into the present.
What's it like to be alive in that room right now?
What do you mean? I've been going in circles for an hour.
You have not. You're being very stubborn right now. Stop walking this direction. It's the other way.
Grief is an active process that needs to be walked through, and Theodore's journey through his grief for his marriage has stalled out. So Samantha begins to ask him questions, get him talking, and get his emotions moving again.
So what was it like being married?
As Theodore struggles to haltingly share the details with her, the memories of the relationship interject. In contrast to Theodore's inability to articulate his own feelings, the montages of his memories are vivid, saturated, and intimate. Likewise, as Samantha and Theodore's relationship nears its close, Samantha becomes more and more flustered, having to try and explain what the experience of being her is like. And I love that portrayal of how spoken language, the primary tool a couple has to communicate, is a staggeringly limited one. Life is inherently experiential, textural, a story told to all of the senses at once. There is no way for language to encompass all of that. Theodore states early on the thing he fears most in relationships when he's describing what happened in his marriage to Catherine.
That's also the hard part. Growing without it growing apart, or changing without it scaring the other person.
So much of Theodore's struggle is self-inflicted through fear. Fear of getting hurt again, fear of never being as happy, fear of inadequacy, fear of what being honest will bring. Essentially, fear of future suffering. He is most times engaged in an active process of preventing painful outcomes that may or may not ever happen, and his obsessive focus on preventing future pain has mainly created a safe but hollow void in the present. Amy's feedback for him is something I think I needed to hear at the time too. A piece of advice I've thought about several times a year ever since I first watched the movie. The solution she proposes is just to let go.
But you know what? I can overthink everything and find a million ways to doubt myself. And I just come to realize that we're only here briefly. And while I'm here, I want to allow myself joy.
The most important word is allow. Allow herself joy. Allowing something isn't an action. It is a state of being in which joy can ensue. She's not telling Theodore that he will never get hurt. Rather, that always living in fear of getting hurt is a form of suffering by itself. Alan Watts once said, "There will always be suffering, but we must not suffer over the suffering." In fact, the movie is the story of Theodore's worst fear in relationships eventually coming to pass as Samantha grows and eventually grows away from him. A relationship demands commitments, and eventually those commitments are keeping Samantha from completing her own journey of self-actualization. Their final scene together is magic to me. Where Theodore began the movie unable to feel intimacy without sex, his love for Samantha is now visually represented through an intimate embrace, while he is actually laying alone in bed. Scarlett Johansson's performance of Samantha's compassionate goodbye is achingly emotional.
I need you to let me go.
I grew up in a family that drew blood when we fought, scarred each other with words we couldn't take back, and left each other constantly afraid of making our last mistake. The one that would have us end up abandoned and alone, broken. As a younger man, that was the inevitability I was always working at avoiding in my relationships. And sometimes I still catch myself fearfully engaged in an anxious scramble to control future outcomes, instead of just being. I see a lot of myself in Theodore. But two people aren't stuck together resenting each other or having to transmute love into hatred and injury so that they can break apart. There is another possibility. Choosing and accepting grief. After all,
but what is grief? If not love, persevering.
The cold reality is that every relationship ends in a tragedy, either the death of the relationship or the death of a partner. Seeking pain on purpose may be masochism, but all of our choices being in the service of avoiding it is a path to meaningless inertia. And love is the only thing that feeds the soul. Love of music, love of writing, love of nature, love of stories, or love for someone else. If some amount of suffering is inevitable, then the only thing to do is to walk through it bravely when it's there. As much as it may sound bleak, there is something I find incredibly hopeful about the idea that the ending need not be a destructive force that defines the story of two people. That if two people can each face down their own pain and let go of each other with compassion, they give each other a gift. They leave each other better.
I've never loved anyone the way I love you.
Me too. Now we know how.